Hello, everyone, again. I am very, very, very sorry about just how poor the quality was on the video I uploaded. I had no idea it was so poor. Hi, buddy. I'm recording right now.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Mess you up?
No, you didn't.
So, what you guys talking about?
I have to redo my video.
Okay, cool.
This won't take me too long. Sorry, I can't go through it again and again and again. I think it had something to do with my my big Bluetooth headset being connected to the phone. Anyway, so I'm going to do it again. You guys deserve so much better than that. I wasn't even gonna post it. I mean, I wasn't even going to upload it, but I really I really liked the way I kind of ended it, and I'm going to try to get that fire back. So, let's continue. Okay. All right. And so, what is probation's view on the proposed release plan? The proposed release plan, in reference to the treatment sought, my one question was, when we were sent the information about the program, it had listed all the costs. Because this is not a contracted provider, probation would not have the ability to pay for that. Regardless of that, though, like already stated, we do not feel that it reduces his risk because of his continued lack of compliance. So what she's saying there is, one, I think that's her polite way of saying they have doubts about Lorne's ability to pay for the treatment. And the second point is, it's not about finding a provider. It's about his continued defiance that he will not cooperate or comply with his conditions of his probation. And in terms of the information that probation has available, approximately when was the most recent time you believe Mr. Armstrong made contact through means of internet or otherwise, with someone with whom he was seeking to engage in some relationship, a woman or somebody, a female that he was looking to engage in some relationship. Approximately within the last 2 months, he has continued to do that. And what she doesn't know, and the judge won't know, is that, and hello, Oscar makes an appearance again. I told you, every time I sit down to do this, here she comes. So, Oscar, please. I can't do this again. So what they don't know is that Lorne very well may have spoken to one of these individuals that very day. He continued up until this hearing, as far as I know, to interact with them. He has continued to do that. And how was that evidence brought to your attention? How do you know of that? He continued to bring up the issue of these females to probation because he wanted to be allowed to continue to have these conversations. And he believed that continued conversations with these females would, because there are many people on the internet that have posted very negative information about Mr. Armstrong. And he thought that the continued conversations with these people would help vindicate him in some way, so he would continue to talk about it with probation. So they found out about it because Lorne brings it up to probation. I think there is a kernel of truth in that Lorne believes that he in one way he continues these interactions because he believes that these are his advocates, that they're going to help him navigate the dangerous waters of the internet, and they're going to let people know what a good guy he really is. But I also think he tells this story to probation because he can't, or he won't, acknowledge just how desperate he really is. I don't even think he realizes it. I think this is kind of his cover story, but there is some truth to it as far as he's concerned. And do you know how he made contact with these individuals, and whether the means of contact was permitted under the term or not prohibited by his conditions of release? He had been told multiple times not to engage with these females because of our concern that we did not know who they were or what their ages were. In addition, he was initially trying to talk to these women and individuals online about his crime and how he didn't do anything wrong and was trying to sell items associated with his case. So Lorne is telling probation he wants to continue to talk to them online about his crime because he didn't do anything wrong and he's trying to make money by selling items associated with his case. I don't understand that. Um, I don't understand it either. I One of the reasons I do these videos is to kind of make a little bit of sense to myself about this cartoon character. So the judge really has no hope of understanding it fully. So initially, when he was allowed to have internet access, he had a YouTube channel where he was trying to sell hats and other items because he had garnered a lot of internet attraction from him being on TV from his original case. So it's t-shirts, but it's close enough. He might as well have been selling hats. Um, and when you read this is like a court transcript. Like, I'm reading this and I'm going, this really, it brings me right back to when he first made that website, his Lorne Armstrong reality website, and when he put that shit on eBay. It just brings me right back to that. Like, this can't be real, right? This can't be real. His original case had some TV relationship. Oh boy, did it ever. Yes, he was on To Catch a Predator. And so when was it that he was permitted to have internet access? And then was it shut down at some point? Yes. So how long a period of time that he was allowed to have this internet access, and when was it changed? From approximately 2015, before I had the case with Officer Oswald, until 2017, when we started receiving anonymous emails about his behavior online, and my office then restricted the internet access. So this is really interesting to me because Lorne claimed on multiple occasions that first, he wasn't banned from the internet, he just couldn't temporarily be on the internet. And also, because Lorne claimed the reason his internet access was taken away was that probation thought he was spending too much time online, that he would have his YouTube channel minimized, because and he was doing his online surveys to make money between jobs. And Lorne was constantly monitoring his YouTube page, which again, I'm going to laugh at myself because if I hadn't been looking at my own YouTube channel, I wouldn't have realized so quickly that there was a problem. So obviously, I stalk my channel. I like to respond to the comments. But Lorne, I think, was really trying to use it as a tool to clear his good name. I mean, that's okay, Cal, that's an obvious statement, right? But I think he really believed that by responding to the negative comments, or trying to come off like he was, I don't know, like a tough guy or something. When someone would make a comment and be like, he'd say something like, okay, here's a really good example. I'm getting really tired, I'm sorry. Here's a really good example. Like, someone had made a comment on one of his videos, a woman, about how, I guess attractive he was, and how could she get in touch with him so she could send him photos of herself. And he was like, well, I can't do that, and thank you anyway. And this person says, well, I guess that's okay. I'm 19. I'm probably way too old for you anyway. Listen, that's the gist of it, obviously. And he says something like, I'll ignore your ignorant comments for now, but watch and learn, girl. Like, like he's trying to come off like he's superior to the people who leave these funny ass comments. And I think he believes that he can manipulate people into thinking he's a good guy again. If any of that just made sense to you guys, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm like, this is my second time through, and I'm not trying to bitch about it, honestly. Because like I said, you guys deserve so much better than that bullshit I uploaded earlier. But it's just, I've done a whole lot of reading today. Let's continue. As of 2017, yes. Okay. And yet you maintain that and have evidence that he continued to after that? Yes. Oh, yes. We have plenty of evidence. And the people that he's been speaking with most recently, your evidence suggests maybe as recently as 2 months ago, Was there any way he could have contacted them other than through the internet? Do you know? He was speaking to them over the phone. The judge is like really trying to suss out there's whether Lorne contacted these people via the internet and whether it was recent in regards to it being a violation of his probation. Now, we know, as a community, we know that, the contact happened when he was allowed access to the internet. We know how all these things occurred, but the judge does not. He was speaking to them over the phone. You don't know how the first contact occurred? No. Well, I have a link I can send you, Judge, if you want to know. All right. It could have been or could not have been, but you don't have any evidence that it was via the internet, right? There was these people stemmed from a group that were online that were following him because of his original case. Okay, all right. So is that where, when you talk about these women that he had spoken to, where all of these in similarly situated in the sense that they had followed him in some way on social media or whatever because of his prior case, or do you know one way or the other? In other words, the judge is saying, did these people get in touch with him because of his charge or not, or do you not know? Some of the individuals. Some? Okay. Yeah, he had indicated. All right. As to all of them, I'm not sure. All right. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? No, Your Honor. Okay. Mr. Morgan, is there anything you'd like to address, or is there anything you'd like to ask of probation, of Officer Shockman? Given my inquiry, you should feel free to do that as well. I would just address a couple things, and if Officer Shockman thinks I'm being inaccurate, please stand up and tell me, kind of. So I think it might be easiest that way. Sure. I do think the context of what has happened with this case is important, and I should have mentioned that before, but now Maria has gone through a decent amount of it. This isn't attention that he necessarily wants when, vindicating himself, etc. I mean, there are people who have been sending inappropriate emails to his mother, who's here today. The internet is a terrible place for things like this, and the reality is that he can only control so much of this. The reality is that he can control none of it, and he shouldn't be trying to control any of it. He should stay as far away from the internet as he possibly can. It's the whole reason it happened. Now, I don't agree with sending harassing emails or photos or whatever to his family members. I think that's very, very wrong, and it just feeds more into Lorne's delusion about how he's right and we're wrong. But the only way he can really control, quote unquote, what's going on is by just staying off the internet. So, and the phone, because he's been off the internet, but he sure can't stay off that fucking phone. So I think that the sort of notoriety that he has should be viewed from that context. In terms of the 15-year-old or 16-year-old, I forget which age, once it was analyzed by probation, it's a prime example of him apparently following what he was supposed to do on probation. So I got to give his lawyer credit for trying to work with this turd that is Lorne Armstrong and his case. He gives a pretty decent argument here. He tries to turn a negative into a positive. Probation says he shows us his photo and it ends up being a 15-year-old girl. And Lorne's attorney turns around and says, well, you wouldn't have known about that if Lorne hadn't told you. So, the guy is really trying. And if Lorne says, and somewhere down the road, he will say his lawyer screwed him, he's full of crap. Because the lawyer only has so much that he can really work with here. So let me start that again. In terms of the 15-year-old or 16-year-old, I forget which age, once it was analyzed by probation, it's a prime example of him apparently following what he was supposed to do on probation. He reached out to them. He told them he asked for permission that was denied, and he didn't go. It sounds like he has people looking to set him up to fail on the internet. And I resent that. Personally, I resent that statement. No one on the internet, except maybe a handful of people who, for example, and I won't get into this, the right or wrong of it. For example, whoever called the cops on Lorne during the live stream when he was screaming at Ramona, that would be setting him up to fail. However, had Lorne not been engaged in this conduct, had he not been drinking, that officer could have shown up at his house and there would have been nothing wrong. Nothing. So he's setting himself up to fail. I find that, I take that a little bit personally. And he may have poor judgment about who he should be interacting with. But so long as there's evidence that he's trying to clear things with probation and not going over their head, then I think that's an example of him doing what he's supposed to under his terms of probation. His lawyer forgets, though, that one of the pieces of evidence was that he was not trying to clear things with probation, but was trying to engage with a female that he could not ascertain their age, and asked this person to mail him explicit photographs in the mail so that they could not be detected by probation. So he's not, that's okay. So this is one example of him doing what he's supposed to do, and there are 10,000 other examples of him not doing that. So there's no reason to think he wouldn't do the same if released on conditions. There's every reason in the world to think he would, because that's what he's been doing all along. He had modification after modification after modification, and he still will not comply. His word means nothing. He gives his word. He's always talking about how important honesty and trust are and how he doesn't lie, but he signs these modifications saying, I won't do thus and such, and then he continues to do thus and such. His word means shit. The relationships with adults, there's no condition. He's not allowed to have either sexual or, for that matter, friendships. He tells me these are friendships with people who are of age. He's allowed to have relationships with people. It'd probably be healthy for him to do so. So I think him interacting with people in and of itself, especially if it's by phone, once he's not allowed internet, is appropriate. And again, evidence that he's willing to follow conditions. So he's trying again to take something like, him having these conversations with strangers on the phone as something that's a positive for Lorne. It's good for him to have relationships. It is good for people to have relationships. We're social creatures. We need society. We need community. But he's forgetting again, and the judge isn't forgetting this. He's forgetting again that probation's concern is that he cannot prove the ages of these individuals with whom he's speaking. It's his drinking that he's had trouble with, and he needs counseling for that, and he's willing to do counseling and to have the monitoring device as a condition of release. Wow, that's really nice of you, Lorne, to be willing to do that. So I think his disclosures to probation actually bode in his favor. And I forgot to mention, but he would be willing to obviously execute any releases necessary with a new treatment provider, so probation would have all information with them and be able to contact them. That means nothing. I would obviously think that one of the conditions of his probation is that the treatment provider be able to communicate with probation on his progress. Maybe not the specifics of his condition or his treatment, but at least whether he's, complying with what they want him to do. So that means nothing that, Mr. Armstrong is willing to do this. Well, if he weren't willing, there'd be a big fucking problem, wouldn't there? Thank you. Mr. McCormick, anything you'd like to add? Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you. And did you have any questions you wanted to ask Officer Shockman? No, I don't, Your Honor. Okay, well, I'll return to kind of what brought us here, at least in part. And this is where he's going to wrap it up. And I really like what this judge has to say. The first time I went through this, and if you were able to hear any of that video, that was sort of my reaction, as I had skimmed through this, but I hadn't read it as in depth, as Lorne likes to say. But now I have, and since this is take two, hopefully I'll be able to articulate my feelings a little bit better. So here's where the judge is going to kind of wrap this up for everybody. Okay, well, I'll return to kind of what brought us here, at least in part. We had the initial appearance in the hearing on the issue of release or detention, and at that time, and this is sometimes unfortunately what we're presented with, we're at the initial appearance and the requirement that somebody be seen without unnecessary delay, usually the same day, sometimes challenging for all parties to be able to garner all the information necessary to those decisions. And I think at the time, Officer Shockman, who just provided, a fair amount of information here, was out of state on office business, but was not present. And so there was another probation officer who had pinch hit for her. And in my first go round of this video, I said something like, and I can't even remember the joke now, and it's so stupid. I said something like, Lorne doesn't even understand what that means, because Lorne doesn't even watch baseball. Stupid asshole. So I'm getting loopy, guys. So we were somewhat limited. Everyone was somewhat limited in the information. And at the time, the issue seemed to be the Mr. Armstrong's dismissal or suspension from the sex offender treatment program due to his lack of candor. He wasn't candid. See, that's what happens when you don't like the word candid, Lorne. Due to his lack of candor with respect to his drinking and how that affected the ability to main of the group, him to continue in the group. And I think Mr. Morgan has shared with us Mr. Hogan's reasoning in that suspension, which again seems to make some sense in terms of how an immediate return without any consequence that they can point to may affect the group dynamic and the ability of the leaders of those groups to hold people accountable. So I can understand that. Yeah. So in other words, there has to be some consequence for Lorne, or the treatment provider, the teacher of the rape class, is not going to have anyone's respect, and it would be chaos. And so at the time, if the issue was whether there could be some other treatment program to get him engaged in and also address that substance abuse problem, then it may be a case where he could be released. That's kind of the history that brought us here. So in other words, when they initially came together, when they initially were looking at this case, the question was he needed a treatment program and he needed to address his substance abuse problem. But there have been some issues that have been brought up that the judge is a little concerned about. That's kind of the history that brought us here. And today, what's been proffered is, in fact, a plan to address both the substance abuse issues and the sex offender treatment by getting, in essence, treatment and monitoring in both cases. And the defendant's argument here, it does have some appeal, and that it seems to address the issues that were of concern, and frankly, if that were all, the only information that was presented, I think I would maybe look favorably upon Mr. Armstrong's request here. So in other words, if it were just the issue of the drinking and the rape class, and Lorne presented this plan to the judge, he would probably grant Lorne's request to be released. So at this point, Lorne's attorney is probably realized that he's not winning this one. I must concede that the information that has been shared today regarding Mr. Armstrong's conduct while on probation is concerning. I'll say. I have no basis to say what the motivation was. Mr. Morgan makes a valid point in that there's nothing that I'm aware of that prohibits Mr. Armstrong from engaging in communications with, relationships with adult women, and there's nothing that the underlying allegations are not suggestive of any misdeeds in that respect. So in other words, he's saying he can't read Lorne's mind. He doesn't know what his motives were, but there's nothing prohibiting Lorne from having relationships with adult women. And he doesn't seem to see any sort of misdeed or anything he did wrong. The concern that the information here raises are as follows. One is that Mr. Armstrong has, it sounds like, fairly consistently, while upon release, deliberately engaged in conduct that he knew was prohibited by his conditions, i.e., graphic photos and, boy, like 1,000 or whatever. The alcohol is the most obvious. The alcohol use is most obvious. The use of the internet and devices that he was prohibited from using is another one, and that's challenging to monitor, especially with someone like Lorne, who can seem to get around anything. He's cunning. I know that's one of Lorne's favorite words, but he is very cunning. He's not very smart, but he is very cunning, and he figures out ways to get around things. Like when he said the bullshit about, I can't be on the computer, but I can stand behind Roy while he's on the computer and tell him how to work it. Well, you're basically using Roy as an instrument to use the computer, and you can't do that. But he justifies it in his mind. That makes it all right. That's very concerning that Lorne really thinks that he's in the right. And perhaps one of the most concerning things that I heard was his attempts at deceit when he was told, and again, I know this is by proffer, when he said, and I think I understand that there's evidence of this from at least somebody who has reported to probation, that he asked that explicit photos be sent, and granted, not of a minor, but be sent in a way so as to make sure that probation was not aware of it. And if, in fact, Mr. Armstrong was engaging in behavior that he knew was permissible and appropriate, there'd be no reason to be concerned about whether probation was aware of it or became aware of it at all. None. So in other words, if Lorne was doing something, if he didn't think he was doing anything wrong, he would never have to try to keep it from probation. And this continued, and again, I don't know the full backstory to the prior case. Let me send you some links, Judge. We'll catch you up. And the fact that, at least from Mr. Armstrong's perspective, he's attempted to kind of clear his name in the public domain, would like to clear his name in the public domain. And I can appreciate that if, in fact, there is information out there that is hurtful to him and his family. I can't today assess that. It may well be the motivation. So in other words, he says, Lorne says his motivation is to clear his family's name. I can't prove that that's not his motivation, but I'm kind of getting the thought that maybe the judge thinks it's bullshit too, but he can't prove it. Another interpretation, however, and here's where he gets into it, and I think, although Officer Shockman did not articulate this, so the judge is basically going to make the argument for probation. It seems to be at least implicit in probation's position and assessment here is that another interpretation is that he welcomes the attention to some degree. If the information about selling items or memorabilia or something that commemorates the incident is accurate, I don't know that it is. It's been proffered here today as something that occurred, and the continued interaction with people affiliated with that case and the notoriety that went with it can be interpreted as wanting to facilitate that or as opposed to clear his name. And I think that's very well put. He's selling items that commemorate his misdeeds. He continues to communicate with people that he met because of these misdeeds. That would seem to say that he welcomes that attention. And he does. We all know he does. This judge isn't stupid. I'd be hard-pressed, based on the evidence through proffer, to make that determination. But I point all those things out because there are concerning factors, so that if you were to look at this and say he has an alcohol problem that's untreated, he's continued to engage in what can at least be construed as risky behavior in the sense of risking a proceeding like this. And what's compelling him to engage in that when he knows this is the consequence? That's real concerning and that just underscores that safety concern. In other words, Lorne realizes the consequences of these actions, continuing these behaviors, is having his freedom taken away, excuse me, my son's trying to get something to eat. Having a proceeding like what is happening in this transcript, and he doesn't stop. That is concerning. And when you have those two potential interpretations, oftentimes in cases it comes down to the burden of proof. And not only does the defendant have the burden here, it's a high burden. It's a clear and convincing evidence standard. And the requirement, what I would have to do to say that the safety concern that has at least been presented today, which is much more crystallized than it was when we were when we were together last time, I'd have to find that by clear and convincing evidence that the conditions would address the safety concerns. So the judge is saying, on the one hand, you have Lorne's motivation may have been to be on the internet to clear his name, to talk to these people to clear his name. On the other hand, Lorne welcomes the attention, and it's risky behavior because he's been advised to stop doing it and he will not. And that just goes to show how he is about everything. So when you have those two things, all things being equal, Lorne has the burden of proving he's not a danger to society. And so the judge will always weigh things in favor of public safety, of keeping people safe from this dangerous person. And Lorne has to prove that he is not a danger. It's already been proven he is. The government already proved his guilt. He admitted his guilt legally. So now Lorne is not an innocent. He doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. He has to prove that he's not a danger, and what the judge is saying is that he can't. And while objectively you may be able to say, look, if he addresses the alcohol and if he gets back into sex offender treatment, that should do it. Well, with somebody who has been in compliance and hasn't been, made attempts to engage in conduct without detection by probation, and engaged in conduct that was in deliberate violation, and there's no argument to be made that he wasn't aware of the conditions. I simply can't get to that level of clear, and that I'm convinced by clear and convincing evidence that these conditions would address the safety concerns. In other words, if Lorne simply had been in compliance but had this alcohol problem and just wouldn't stop drinking, they might give him the benefit of the doubt. But he has time and time again tried to fool probation. He admits it. I do appreciate the fact that, Mr. Morgan, you have taken the steps to address the concerns that were raised at the initial appearance here, and I'm certainly sensitive to the fact that when the court identifies the areas of concern and then somebody attempts to address those concerns, there's a conclusion that it's not sufficient. It's not sufficient in this instance because of the additional information that is available to me now that wasn't then, and understood. Had it been available, I probably would have identified other areas of concerns. So if the judge had had this information earlier, I think it's sort of his way of saying, you really tried hard. I appreciate your efforts, but it's not enough. So I do not want you to think that your efforts were for naught or not appreciated by the court in your attempt to address the concerns. Understood. Thank you. I understand them, so while we're going to grant the motion to reopen we have granted the motion to reopen the detention hearing, I'm going to deny the defendant's request for release upon conditions for the reasons I've just articulated. Are there any other issues that the government would like the court to address? Nothing else from the government. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Morgan, anything? Nothing else, Your Honor. Thank you. Officer Shockman, anything? No, Your Honor. Thank you. We'll be in recess. Proceedings concluded at 10:49 a.m. And that, my friends, is the end of the detention transcripts. The detention hearing transcripts. Part 2, take 2. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I sincerely apologize. I would never knowingly have put up something such poor quality. I know most of my stuff is pretty poor quality anyway, but that was uncalled for. I never even meant to do it. My head was messed up at the time. Kayla was supposed to make me some mac and cheese and she didn't. Anyway, I love you all, preciouses, and I'll talk to you later, okay? Bye, sweethearts.